Welcome to episode 78 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kellerin. Today we have a very special first-time guest on to talk with us about commodities, current events, geopolitics, everything going on under the sun, and the recent book release they had about college and the preparation and a bunch of other things I think will be interesting conversation. So, Doug, thanks for coming on.
It's nice to be here with you, Ben. Where are you physically? I'm in Buenos Aires right now.
I'm in Boise, Idaho. So I
Uh,
grew up in Seattle, made the escape a couple of years ago. So it's treating me better out here than Seattle was. So
I
it's
should hope so. I should hope so.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. No, I definitely have Argentina on the bucket list. I've got a couple ski trips that I want to do at some point down there. I think I've heard good things about some of the skiing, but I do want to jump right into it and get into what's going on in commodities, precious metals, and some of the different areas that you kind of focus on. Because I think you've said in the past that this is going to be the last bull market for gold. And I think there's signs of what's going on with the financial system and gold being bought by central banks, all these different things where I think there's a potential phase change for what's going on with gold. So maybe we could start there and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, gold first became uh, an investment-related commodity, really, back in 1971 when Nixon illegalized it. Well, let me put it this way: gold has gone from $35 to today $4,200. It's had a huge run for a commodity. Now, part of that is because it was artificially suppressed by the government for decades after Roosevelt took the dollar off of gold back in 1934. But any commodity that's gone up as far as gold has, over 100 times, in other words, just in the course of a lifetime since Nixon, you can't treat it the same way as you might have back then. I've always been a gold bull. Why? Because gold is money. Always has been money. I think it always will be money. Well, always is a long time. But uh, I don't treat it the same way that I once did. I still accumulate gold. I've never sold any gold that I've accumulated. I've treated it as savings uh, more than as a speculation. But relative to everything else, gold is, I'd say, reasonably priced. For many years, we used to say that the price of gold was underpriced relative to its historical value to buy a meal, to buy a suit of clothes, to buy a house. But now it's reasonably priced relative to all those other things. So where's the speculative upside potential in it? Well, I'll tell you where I think it is. It's that uh, the dollar is moving into its uh, final days, I think, or I should say final years. And the question is, if the dollar disappears, which it will, what what price of gold would be reasonable? And I'd say that you're probably talking about 20 or $30,000 an ounce. Why do I pick that figure? You take the number of dollars outstanding in the world now and divide it by the number of ounces of gold that are supposed to be owned by the US government, and you come up with numbers in the 20, 30, $40,000 per ounce range. So that's the best guess. And foreign countries like China, Russia, India, and others are have their central banks have been buying gold. And it's pretty clear since they don't want to trade with dollars. The Russians found out how dangerous that is. And they don't trust each other's phony baloney currencies. So they're buying gold because you need money to trade. Uh, well, anyway, I'm kind of bouncing around on these things, but yeah, gold's going higher, but for different reasons than it's gone higher in the past. It's a
Yeah,
different game now.
I think it is interesting to see how it's kind of become a lot more consensus in the last like 6 months, even with some of the notes put out by different banks and talking about like 60-20-20 portfolios and all these different things. But I think there's potentially more, I think a little more potential in silver and platinum. And I'd be curious to hear what you think about those, and maybe also some of the miners, because there's, I mean, the joke is that mining is a shitty business, but I think there's certain windows where it can work out pretty well owning some of them.
I was one of the first people to make that observation years ago. Uh, that's a crappy business. And I still believe it to be true. Um, as far as the other commodities are concerned, yeah, they're underpriced relative to gold and other things. For instance, silver is bouncing around $50, which it's hit twice before in the past. But in real terms, if it was to go to the highs that it was in the past when it hit $50, it would have to be 250 today because the dollar's lost so much of its value. So yeah, I'm bullish on silver, although it's definitely a secondary monetary metal. It's really an industrial metal, but it's a great industrial metal because it's like each of the other 92 naturally occurring elements. It has unique characteristics. And in the case of silver, it's the most reflective and the most conductive of all the metals. The best estimate is there's about 7 billion ounces of gold that have been mined since the dawn of history. They're all basically still in existence. And at this point, we mine about 100 million ounces of gold per year. So the amount of gold in existence increases about 1.5% per year. Silver, we mine about 1 billion ounces per year, rough numbers. But it's all consumed. So when the public gets interested in these metals, because out of fear, some of them out of greed, but mostly out of fear, uh, there's really no limit to where these things can go because the gold is all held by central banks, and the silver, there's not large inventories of it. So it, we could see silver at $200, $300 an ounce easily. I think that's going to happen. Just to go back to its previous high in real terms.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see because there's always like the ongoing hum of currency debasement and dollar becoming worth less versus real things. But I think the forgotten kind of redheaded stepchild of the precious metals is platinum, and I think that's one that I think has a setup even after the run it's had so far this year is pretty interesting. Have you kind of been looking at that recently, or what's your kind of view
Well,
on platinum?
another industrial metal. Problem with platinum and palladium both are they're used as catalysts for the automotive industry, mainly for that. So you're making a play on what's going to happen with electric vehicles and gas vehicles. On the other hand, platinum and palladium are almost exclusively, almost, but not totally, mined in South Africa and Russia. And those are unstable supply sources. So, answer to the question, yeah, I'm bullish on platinum and palladium. But, you know, who's got the time or the money to try to kiss all the girls and watch all the markets? So, when it comes to these things, I think the place to be is in mining stocks. And I've said any number of times that mining is a crappy business. I mean, you spend a huge amount of money to find a deposit, and that's when your problems really start, because then you have to uh, drill lots of holes in the ground to find out how much there is and what grade it is, and you can't really be totally sure, and get permits. And if you get the permits and raise the hundreds of millions that it usually takes, or billions, to build the mine, then you're going to be sat upon by governmental agencies looking for their cut, and native groups and NGOs, and it's a horrible business. So no wonder Warren Buffett has never invested in mining for those and many other reasons. But having said that, right now, mining stocks, gold mining stocks, are so cheap historically, relative to just about everything else. They're at about the cheapest level they've ever been. Why? Because the cost of mining industry-wide is about $1,500 an ounce. That's called an all-in sustaining cost. And with gold at 4,000 or 4,200 or wherever it is, current miners are hugely profitable. So, in fact, they're so profitable, it's hard to figure out why nobody owns them. The public is totally uninterested in them. Institutions are totally uninterested in them. I understand why institutions aren't interested because although DEI is fading away, mining is about is the boogeyman of DEI. Miners rape Mother Earth and evict the natives, all kinds of stupid things like that are miners are accused of. But at some point, the profitability of the business will become apparent, and these stocks, which are just a teeny weeny portion of the market, uh, will explode upwards. Like, to be specific, mining stocks as a whole, all of them, are only 2% of the total market right now. So when people get interested in them, it's going to be like trying to get the contents of Hoover Dam through a garden hose.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a visualization. I think if you think about the money that could be flowing into gold, silver, even copper, oil and gas, especially at the current valuations, there's a lot of setups that I think look pretty interesting. But I guess on the mining stocks, you look at those two right now, and this is a kind of a observation where if you have gold being where it is, oil as cheap as it is, and I think likely to get more expensive, right? That's a big part of their costs. I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on with the gold miners effectively being like a business that is long gold and short oil. Like, what are your thoughts on how that might impact a lot of the miners moving forward?
Well, that's a very good point because typically uh, the major cost of running a gold mine is energy, oil. It's a big deal. So there's so many things when you're playing with commodities, trying to figure out the relative value of things and how to correlate them. But look, I'm bullish on oil as well as gold, but for different reasons. Mining gold today, if you're in production, if you've jumped over all the hurdles and gone through all the hoops, and you've got a mine that's in production, you're coining money. Oil is something different because the industry-wide cost, and of course this is an accounting thing and it's hard to compute, but let's figure that oil typically costs something like $60 a barrel to bring out of the ground. It can be much more, it can be much less, but that's kind of a rough number. So there's a lot of leverage in oil at this point, and that's why oil stocks are very, very cheap because most of them aren't very, very profitable because they're basically just trading dollars by producing more. So, answer to the question, I guess I'm equally bullish on oil and gas and gold, but for different reasons.
Interesting. That's I know a lot of the so-called gold bugs definitely are partial to gold specifically, and you kind of hear them talk down oil. But with some of the things I've been seeing as far as seems like money's starting to rotate into energy, and you look at I'm not sure if it'll be a repeat of 2022 where it's like energy basically shoots the lights out and the rest of the market suffers, but I think there's a decent chance that energy's in for a better time ahead than the last year or two. But
And it's not just oil and gas. Uh, it's also uranium. With this mania that's built up building data centers, which are power hogs, nuclear, which I've always held as the safest, the cheapest, and the cleanest form of mass power generation, is going to be necessary to power these trillion-dollar data centers, industry-wide, that is to say. So that I think the price of uranium is going to be heading higher as well. And coal, which is the one mineral absolutely everybody hates. You know, it's dirty, it kills people, the Chinese use it, on and on. Um, I'm very bullish on coal as well. There are coal stocks that I own, Australian mostly, that yield in between 10 and 15% in current dividends. That's with coal being cheap and likely to go much higher as a supplement to nuclear and oil and gas. And I'd completely forget about because it's uneconomic, except for special situations, uh, which is to say solar and wind. No interest in those things at all. They're
yeah,
boondoggles.
no, it's it'll be interesting to see. I think there'll be graveyards of solar farms and wind turbines and all this other stuff once the subsidies go away, which they eventually will. But um, on the coal stocks, it's interesting too because people look at them as, oh, it's bad for the environment, and they don't even think about, well, like, how do you get the steel? How do you get, it's not just energy production with thermal coal. So there's a lot of people where you explain some of this stuff to them, like the wind turbines and all the steel that takes. They don't just like fall out of the sky and start producing energy, right? So it's a lot of hypocrisy. I think it's starting to change, but we'll see if it kind of continues that trend.
Well, maybe it is, but the problem is that the average person, absolutely including somebody that's misallocated 4 years sitting behind a desk in college, knows almost nothing about science and technology and the natural world, because most people that go to college are just indoctrinated by woke humanities teachers, and they don't know anything about this except what they read in the papers, which is sold to them by equally woke reporters. So I don't know. Uh, Makes me a little bit pessimistic thinking about that. I mean, reality's on our side, but sometimes it takes a long time for reality to assert itself.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in a bunch of different areas over the last handful of years, and I think I'm pretty optimistic on some things, but on others, I think the next 5 or 10 years are going to be chaotic, and that might be an understatement, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's an understatement because as I look at the US, it seems to me that we're on the cusp of a civil war of sorts between the red people and the blue people who really hate each other. And I don't think they can live in the same political entity with each other for too much longer. And there's a prospect of World War III as well. When you look at the criminal personalities running the states of Europe who are rearming now and thinking of going back to conscription, doubling the amount they spend on weapons. Uh, yeah, we're headed for some rough times in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I think I was reading one of the recent pieces from your guys' Substack on demographics and destiny and the U.S. And I think that's a big part that a lot of people are still uncomfortable talking about. But you kind of rewind to where things were 50, 60 years ago, I don't think we'd be having some of these same issues. And I think we'll eventually see a very different form of government here in the US. And I don't know if that means different regions splitting apart or if it's something more authoritarian. But I mean, the current system definitely doesn't function very well. That's for sure. So,
No, it's odd. There have been at least two movies that have discussed the prospect of a civil war in the US that have come out in the last year or two. That's unusual. But thoughts like that are in the wind and on people's minds at this point.
yeah, I think there's maybe a little bit of predictive programming in there somewhere, but you do kind of look at like the media landscape and social media, all these different things. And I look at some of the changes that are happening, and they're happening very quickly. But I think there's some good and some bad that comes from basically completely decentralizing social media and everyone's access to information. And there's definitely problems with it. Like you see the amount of AI just generated garbage that's flying around these days. And that's maybe the last question I wanted to ask about, because at least for on the investment topics, because you have kind of a setup where all these tech companies that were high margin cash cows, like they didn't have to reinvest a ton in the business, like really good businesses, now they're turning into capex heavy, very I mean the valuations are still pretty expensive, but they're all dumping billions or hundreds of billions of dollars into developing data centers, AI, chips, whatever it may be. And I look at it as like, okay, that's just capital cycle at play, and eventually valuations will be like gravity. But what are your kind of thoughts on the whole AI build out, how long that lasts, if you think there's some serious potential for artificial intelligence, and what it
Yeah.
might look like moving forward?
Well, I'm a technophile, but when it comes to the actual applications of something like this, I really don't know what these people are up to, gathering all kinds of data on absolutely everything. And it's unclear to me exactly how it's going to be used, A, but used profitably, B. Uh, Personally, I, as much as possible, I like to disconnect myself from the electronic world. We're in the electronic world right now as we're speaking. But that said, I've come to dislike it and fear it because these companies and the governments control it. And they have their own agendas, which are not really aligned to the freedom and prosperity of individuals like you and I. So I'm not saying that you ought to get a cabin in the woods and disconnect totally, but I've got a feeling that a lot more people are going to dislike as well as fear what's going on. And with the immense amount of capital that they're investing, I think there's a mania that's being misallocated. And a lot of these companies are going to blow themselves up, such as happened with WorldCom and Global Crossing and during the last tech boom 25 years ago. It's so high tech, big wreck. And I suppose if it all works, we're going to live in the world of the Terminator. Robots, I think, are very interesting, talking about technology. That is something that's going somewhere. And that
Yeah.
does relate to artificial intelligence, obviously, but this is so hard to predict. It really is.
Yeah, I think the one kind of foundational difference between what's going on now and like previous capex cycles is like you go back to railroads or other stuff that's happened previously, a lot of that build out is something that is going to last decades, if not longer. And a lot of the investment happening now is like you're on the treadmill and you're investing in chips or like equipment that is going to be just not useful in 12 months or 2 years or whatever it may be. and so you're constantly on that cycle. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I I look at it, and some of the technology advancements that have happened definitely are not a net positive for society. So
I agree with you. And if any of your listeners have any high-tech stocks that are involved in this, now's an excellent time to hit the bid and do something more prudent and potentially much more profitable with your money. And I'm not trying to be a one-trick pony, but cyclically, these crappy little mining stocks are ultra double cheap, and they have the potential to go 10 to 1 or more as a group. So that's where I think you ought to be.
yeah, I tend to agree. It's bubbles create anti-bubbles is kind of the way I look at it, and you've got something that's always neglected or out of favor while everyone chases a shiny object as far as technology and other things like that. But I guess kind of the last question I might have as far as geopolitics and where you kind of see all this stuff headed. I know I can only keep you a little bit longer, but what's your kind of view on like what's going on geopolitically right now? Because it seems like we bounce from one thing to the next, whether it's Israel, Iran in the Middle East. Now, a couple months later, everyone's focused on Venezuela, or it's, I mean, a couple months from now, it could be China. Who knows? But what's your kind of thoughts on the whole geopolitical situation as far as like, do we kind of keep bumbling along without creating something too disastrous, or is it something where you think it flares up eventually?
Well, I think it's really scary because, like I said before, in Europe, and Trump is pushing this, which is impresses me as insane. European countries have been spending like 2% of their GDPs on weapons. Trump wants them to go up to 5%. Well, wait a minute. What are they going to do with those weapons? But they're moving towards that direction and conscripting people. And the Russians are definitely, I've always felt this, the Russians were basically pushed uh, into attacking the Ukraine. It was really shameful. But at long last, they're winning that battle. My guess is that what the Russians will do is simply take over the parts of the Ukraine that are basically occupied by Russians, not Ukrainians, the Crimea and the Donbass region and so forth. And that should be the end of the war. Uh, it's amazing that uh, somebody like Zelensky, who was promoted into being, he's just a little nothing, nobody pervert, quite frankly, and he's been promoted as a world savior. And even when the Panama Papers came out years ago, it was shown that Zelensky had already stolen several $100 million. Now it's up to several $1 billion. So that's what's going on there in the Ukraine. And as far as what's going on with Iran, there is something interesting in that Iran, Tehran in particular, is having a 100-year drought, and there's no water in the city. They're talking about exiting the entire city, moving all those people someplace else because there's no water. Uh, is that does that have anything to do with a weather-directed weapon? Uh, Something that the U.S. has been playing with for years. But it just seems to me that the whole world is getting very unstable. Like Trump uh, looks like he's moving to attack Venezuela. Well, wait a minute. Cuba uh, is kind of a bad actor, and it's been there for for many decades. Why is why is Venezuela on the dance card. It's well known that there's very little drugs that are produced in Venezuela, almost nothing exported from Venezuela, but that's why they say they want to attack Venezuela. So, and what will the Venezuelan regime do? Well, if I was Maduro, I'd grab $1 billion, which is about a reasonable number for a head of state who's getting out of Dodge, and go and live in Dubai comfortably for the rest of my life. Who knows if that's what he's going to do? Uh, but then Trump says things off the top of his head like, maybe we should attack Nigeria to save the Christians in the north. It's one thing after another. So look, it's a chaotic situation, and all you can do is rig for heavy weather because the crazy people are coming out, and all the governments of the world are bankrupt, which makes them unstable, which makes them want to do things to distract the populace, and so it's. Listen, I feel more comfortable, frankly, when I'm here in South America than I do in the U.S., that being the case.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting to see because as someone who's paid a lot more attention to what's going on over the last like 5-10 years than when I was younger, it's something where I look at these situations and I talk to more and more people about like what's going on, and it seems like the unanimous or near unanimous view is that we should be more focused on what's happening here in the U.S. than what's going on outside our borders. But that's, I guess, too much to ask for. But who knows? Maybe there will be some political changes in the next 5 or 10 years that push that direction.
I'd say you're right, because who knows what the numbers really are, but something on the order of $50 billion, I don't know if that's a lot of money or a little money anymore, is shipped from the US government to foreign governments every year now for no good reason. And most of that money comes from poor people in the United States and goes to rich people in foreign countries, in poor foreign countries. I mean, it's actually quite criminal. I'm so sorry that Trump has made no moves at all to change that.
Yeah, that's definitely there are a lot of things I think he could do to improve his chances in the midterms, but if his focus is going to be on foreign conflicts instead of deportations and getting rid of H-1Bs and all this other stuff that I think is just a layup to win more control in the midterms, then I don't know. We'll see what happens. He's better than Kamala, but
Oh yeah,
I
well,
am still
that's
pretty
right. Well, you got to
pessimistic.
look at the bright side. So that's
Yeah,
important.
yeah. It's we'll see what happens, but I think there's going to be some big changes. Is kind of my view in the next 5 or 10 years. But I think we'll kind of see where it goes. I think there, like you're saying, it makes sense to be prepared for a bunch of different situations, and that's something that you guys focus on with your newsletter and Substack and all the other things. So why don't you let any listeners that might not be familiar with your work or books where they can find you?
Well, we have an excellent daily free blog at internationalman.com. So everybody should subscribe to that. And we have a newsletter which covers, at this point, mostly resource and mining stocks called Crisis Investing. And Matt Smith and I do a podcast on YouTube called Doug Casey's Take. And of course, we just finished this book, The Preparation, which is about what a young man should do instead of going to college and taking on a lot of debt to have his mind cluttered. And last, I'd point out that I've written 3 novels, Speculator, Drug Lord, and Assassin, which trace our hero as he goes through politically incorrect occupations. And those are on Amazon. So that kind of covers it.
Yeah, I was listening to one of your recent podcasts with Michael Yon on the YouTube, and definitely got some interesting information. And some of the conversations you guys have over there are definitely worth a listen. So you guys should go check out Doug, find all his work, and definitely take a peek at some of the stuff on the Substack and the YouTube and anywhere else. And if you do have high school age boys, definitely check out The Preparation. It's a book I wish I had. And when I was 15, 16, looking at colleges, probably would have made a different decision. But yeah, is there anything else you want to hit on, or anything we kind of skipped over in
Nope,
our
that's it.
conversation?
I just wish I had the book, The Preparation, when I was in high school too, but turned out I had to write the book.
Yeah, I've been poking and prodding a couple friends and subscribers if they have high school age kids that like they should definitely look at it and seriously consider if it's a better option than what the universities offer today. So,
Yep.
yeah, I think with that we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.